August 29, 1944. The reconnaissance aircraft circles at 10,000 feet above eastern France, high enough to avoid anti-aircraft fire, low enough for the observer to see the roads below with brutal clarity. Oberst Heinrich Schäfer, intelligence officer for Army Group G, stares through binoculars at something his training did not prepare him to interpret. The roads are moving, not metaphorically. The highways themselves appear to pulse with motion, endless streams of vehicles flowing east like blood through arteries, a circulation system of steel and rubber that stretches from horizon to horizon. He counts 60 trucks in a single kilometer. Multiplies that by the visible road length. The number becomes absurd. He counts again more carefully. The number remains absurd. Through breaks in the cloud cover, he tracks individual convoys. Not military columns interspersed with civilian traffic, but dedicated lanes of American trucks marked with red circles, moving in perfect formation with intervals suggesting discipline rather than chaos. The German supply columns he has observed throughout the war stretch perhaps 5 kilometers and move at walking pace, vulnerable to air attack, dependent on fuel they barely possess. These American convoys stretch beyond the limits of visibility, moving at speeds that suggest fuel is not merely available but expendable. Schäfer records his observations with mechanical precision because emotion would make them harder to believe. He has been an intelligence officer for 4 years. He has analyzed British logistics in North Africa, Soviet supply systems at Stalingrad, American capabilities in Italy. He thought he understood the material conditions of modern warfare. But this operation below him represents something beyond his conceptual framework. This is not a military force supplied by logistics. This is logistics as military force, supply itself transformed into strategic weapon. The pilot banks for another pass. Schäfer photographs the road networks. Though he knows photographs cannot capture scale, cannot convey the psychological weight of witnessing an entire civilization mobilized for continental delivery. Back at headquarters, his superiors will study these photographs and question his counts. They will suggest reconnaissance error, observational bias, misidentification of civilian traffic. They will reject his numbers because accepting them requires accepting Germany's strategic irrelevance. But Schäfer has been counting vehicles for 4 years. He knows the difference between a convoy and an army. What moves below him is both. The operation is designated the Red Ball Express, though Schäfer does not yet know this name. It began operating 5 days earlier, conceived in a 36-hour emergency meeting when American armies advancing across France discovered their advance had outrun their supply lines. General George Patton's Third Army was consuming 800,000 gallons of gasoline daily. First Army under General Courtney Hodges required similar quantities. The port facilities in Cherbourg could deliver supplies to the beaches but not to armies, now 400 kilometers inland, racing toward the German border faster than any military force in history. The American response was characteristically direct. They created a dedicated highway system, closed to civilian traffic marked with red circles, the railroad term for priority express shipment, and assigned every available truck to continuous operation. At its peak, which occurs on this very day, Schäfer conducts his reconnaissance. The Red Ball Express operates 5,958 vehicles carrying 12,342 tons of supplies to forward depots. The round trip from Normandy beaches to supply dumps near Chartres exceeds 250 kilometers. The trucks run 24 hours daily. Drivers sleep 4 hours, drive 20. They maintain this tempo not for days but for months. Schäfer does not know these numbers yet. He knows only that he is observing an impossibility. Wehrmacht logistics doctrine, refined through decades and tested across 2 world wars, establishes clear parameters. A mechanized division requires 300 tons of supplies daily in combat, 100 when static. Delivery capacity decreases 30% for every 100 kilometers from supply bases. Beyond 400 kilometers, truck-based supply becomes mathematically impossible. Fuel consumed in transportation exceeds fuel delivered to the front. The Americans are operating at 700 kilometers. They are not merely exceeding German logistics theory. They are violating it. The implications settle slowly like sediment in disturbed water. If the Americans can supply armies at this distance, at this tempo, then distance itself ceases to be defensive terrain. The Wehrmacht strategy for the past 2 years has relied on trading space for time, withdrawing to extend Allied supply lines until logistics collapsed American offensives. This worked against the Soviets in 1941, before American trucks arrived via Lend-Lease. It worked in Italy when Allied forces struggled to supply operations beyond Naples. But it will not work in France. The Americans have solved the supply problem not through superior planning or better organization, but through overwhelming scale. They have transformed logistics from calculated risk into brute force. Schäfer's aircraft returns to base, a temporary airfield carved from French farmland, already marked for evacuation as American forces advance. He develops his film in a field darkroom, prints the clearest images, composes his report with the dry precision that makes unpleasant truth easier to digest. His commanding officer, General Major Kurt Fischer, reads the report twice before speaking. "You are certain of these vehicle counts?" "Ja, Herr General." "I counted 3 times. The lowest estimate is 5,400 vehicles observed across 30 kilometers of highway. The highest is 6,200. I used the median figure in my report." Fischer removes his glasses, cleans them with methodical movements that suggest he is organizing thoughts rather than removing dust. He has commanded supply operations for Army Group G since June. He knows logistics like some men know theology, has a system of rules that govern reality more firmly than physics. He knows that what Schäfer describes should not exist. The fuel consumption alone? Fischer calculates silently. Each truck consumes perhaps 20 liters per 100 kilometers. 6,000 trucks, 700-kilometer round trip. 14 million liters daily just for the transport vehicles. This is more than our entire Army group receives monthly. Ja, Herr General. Where do they obtain such quantities? The Ploiești oil fields are partially destroyed. We know Allied fuel supplies were constrained in Italy. How do they suddenly possess unlimited petroleum? Schäfer has been investigating this question for weeks. His answer comes from multiple sources. Captured American documents, interrogation of prisoners, intelligence reports from agents in neutral countries. They are producing synthetic rubber, Herr General. They import crude petroleum from America, refine it in England, transport it across the channel in quantities that exceed our total oil production. But more significantly, they are not conserving. They assume wastage. Their planning documents, captured near Caen, allocate 30% loss to spillage, evaporation, and battlefield damage. They produce enough excess to render efficiency irrelevant. This is the detail that breaks Fischer's composure. Not the scale. Scale can be explained by American industrial capacity. But the philosophy, the casual acceptance of waste that German planners would consider criminal negligence. Germany calculates to the leader. America calculates to the tanker ship and rounds up. The difference is civilizational. We must inform OB West, Fischer says. Field Marshal von Rundstedt must understand that conventional defensive operations cannot stop this supply system. They will simply drive around our positions and continue. Schäfer says nothing. He has written 14 reports in the past 3 months documenting American material superiority. He knows von Rundstedt has received them. He knows they have been forwarded to OKW, to Jodl, perhaps to Hitler himself. He knows nothing has changed. German strategy continues to assume American logistics will collapse under its own weight. This assumption is not strategic doctrine. It is prayer disguised as planning. 200 kilometers northwest, the reality Schäfer photographed unfolds with mechanical precision. Master Sergeant James Wilson, 3348th Quartermaster Truck Company, has been driving for 18 hours straight. His GMC CCKW2, 1 2-ton truck, the Americans call it Jimmy, though Wilson just calls it the truck, carries 3 tons of artillery ammunition destined for Third Army positions near Verdun. The load exceeds regulation capacity, but regulation has become flexible when armies advance 70 miles daily. Wilson is black. This matters and does not matter. It matters because the American military is segregated, because 75% of Red Ball Express drivers are African American soldiers assigned to quartermaster companies, because combat roles remained largely closed to them. It does not matter because the trucks do not care about their driver's race, and the German shells falling near the supply depots do not discriminate. His unit landed at Omaha Beach 10 days after D-Day. Wilson still remembers the smell, cordite and decay mixing with salt air, the beach littered with destroyed equipment and bodies the burial details had not yet reached. He had expected combat. He got trucks. At first this felt like disappointment, like being assigned to support rather than glory. 20 days into the Red Ball Express, with his hands bleeding from wrestling steering wheels and his sleep measured in stolen minutes, glory has lost its appeal. He is fighting a different war, where enemies are distance and time, where victory is measured in tons delivered rather than ground taken. The convoy moves at 35 miles per hour, controlled by motorcycle escorts who maintain intervals and prevent civilian traffic from entering the Red Ball corridors. The highways themselves are marked with red balls painted on signs every quarter mile, visible even at night when drivers operate with only cat-eye blackout lights to avoid Luftwaffe attention. The convoys run in both directions on separate highways, trucks loaded with supplies rolling east, empty trucks returning west for refills, a continuous circulation that never stops. Wilson passes a broken-down truck by the roadside. Mechanics swarm over it with the efficiency of pit crews. The Red Ball Express maintains forward repair stations every 50 kilometers, equipped with spare parts replacement engines, mechanics who can disassemble and rebuild a GMC transmission in darkness using tools and muscle memory. Approximately 30% of vehicles require daily maintenance. The Americans solve this problem not by building more reliable trucks but by building more trucks. If 6,000 trucks have a 30% failure rate, deploy 9,000 trucks. The arithmetic is crude but effective. Behind Wilson's truck, a convoy of tankers hauls aviation gasoline to forward airfields. Behind them, cargo trucks carry rations, not the hard biscuits and preserved meat that German soldiers subsist on, but varied meals including canned meat, vegetables, chocolate, cigarettes. The American military has calculated that well-fed soldiers fight more effectively than poorly fed soldiers, and that the cost of transporting diverse food is less than the cost of poor morale. This calculation reflects American economic logic. Abundance is cheaper than austerity when industrial capacity can produce abundance. The convoy passes through a French village. Civilians wave, some throw flowers, others stand silent, watching the endless American procession with expressions suggesting they are witnessing something beyond military operations, watching industrial civilization itself roll past their medieval churches and stone farmhouses. Children count trucks until they lose count. Old men who remember the First World War shake their heads. The Germans came with horses and wagons. The Americans come with trucks that outnumber the population of entire departments. Wilson reaches the depot at Chartres 16 hours after departure. The depot is chaos organized into system. Trucks arriving every few minutes, forklifts moving pallets, quartermaster personnel directing traffic with the urgency of men who understand that delayed supplies mean dead soldiers. Wilson backs his truck into the unloading bay. A sergeant checks his manifest, confirms the load, waves him forward. 12 minutes later, his truck is empty. He pulls forward to the refueling station, where pumps push 50 gallons of gasoline into his tank in less than 4 minutes. He has eaten nothing since breakfast. A Red Cross station provides coffee and donuts. He drinks coffee that tastes like battery acid and eats donuts that taste like heaven. 26 minutes after arriving at Chartres, he is back on the highway heading west for another load. This tempo cannot be sustained indefinitely. Human endurance has limits, but the Red Ball Express does not need to operate indefinitely. It needs to operate until rail lines are repaired, until captured ports are cleared, until the logistics system catches up with the advance. The Express is emergency response, not permanent solution. But even as emergency response, it exceeds Germany's normal operations. The Red Ball Express at its worst is better than Wehrmacht logistics at its best. September 10, 1944. Oberst Schäfer receives new intelligence from multiple sources: POW interrogations, captured documents, reports from agents operating in liberated France. The information assembles into a mosaic that becomes more disturbing the more completely it forms. The Red Ball Express is not America's primary supply system. It is their backup. A captured American logistics manual, taken from a destroyed headquarters vehicle near Nancy, describes the Express as an expedient measure necessitated by temporary inadequacy of rail and port facilities. The Americans consider this extraordinary operation, 6,000 trucks moving 12,000 tons daily, a stopgap. Their normal logistics system operates through ports, railways, and pipelines, scaled for sustained continental operations. The Red Ball Express represents American capacity to improvise better solutions than Germany can plan. Schäfer compares American and German logistics documentation. The contrast is educational. German supply manuals emphasize conservation, efficiency, making maximum use of minimum resources. Every liter of fuel is accounted for. Every ton of supplies is justified. This reflects German reality: limited production, constrained resources, logistics as mathematics of scarcity. American supply manuals emphasize redundancy, overage, ensuring that shortages never constrain operations. They plan for 30% waste and 50% safety margins. This reflects American reality: logistics as mathematics of abundance. The numbers are devastating. The United States produced 382,000 trucks between 1940 and 1945. Germany produced 345,000. The GMC CCKW truck alone, a single model from a single manufacturer, accounts for 560 to the 500 units, more than Germany's entire truck production across all manufacturers and models. Each American infantry division is allocated 2,500 vehicles. Each German infantry division has perhaps 400 vehicles and depends on horse-drawn wagons for most supply movement. Horses. Schäfer thinks about horses. The Wehrmacht employs 2.75 million horses during the war. Each horse requires 12 pounds of grain daily, plus care from attendants, stabling, veterinary services, shoeing. Horses travel 30 kilometers daily at walking pace. They cannot operate at night without risking injury. They die from exhaustion, disease, Allied bombing. Horse-based logistics means that German supplies move at medieval speeds while American supplies move at industrial pace. The contrast is almost obscene. 80% of German logistics is horse-drawn. 100% of American logistics is motorized. German infantry divisions march on foot. American infantry divisions ride in trucks. German artillery is towed by horses. American artillery is towed by trucks. The Wehrmacht is a 20th century force grafted onto 19th century logistics. The American military is fully industrialized, logistics and combat unified into a single mechanized system. Schäfer writes another report. He documents the Red Ball Express statistics. He calculates comparative logistics capacity. The Red Ball alone delivers more supplies daily than the entire Wehrmacht in Western Europe receives through all sources. He notes that this operation runs for 82 days from August 25 through November 16, transporting 412,193 tons across 122 million ton miles. He adds that American sources describe this operation as temporary and inadequate. His report concludes with assessment. The American logistics system represents not superior planning, but superior production. They solve supply problems not through efficiency but through scale. This approach is only possible for an economy operating at American industrial levels. Germany cannot compete with this system. We can only delay its effects through tactical action until Allied supply lines overextend naturally. This final sentence is diplomatic fiction. Schäfer does not believe Allied supply lines will overextend. The Americans have demonstrated they can supply operations at 700 kilometers. There is no reason to assume they cannot supply operations at 1,000 kilometers or 1,500. The Red Ball Express will end not because it fails, but because better logistics systems become available. Repaired railways, opened ports, pipelines. In Berlin, Oberst Alexis von Roen, head of Foreign Army's West Intelligence Section, reads Schäfer's report along with similar assessments from other field intelligence officers. Von Roen is Prussian aristocracy, professionally competent, privately disgusted by the Nazi regime. He will be executed in 1945 for peripheral connections to the Stauffenberg assassination plot. In September 1944, he is still alive, still compiling intelligence, still documenting truths that his superiors do not wish to acknowledge. Von Roen's files contain intelligence on American industrial production compiled from multiple sources. Open source information from American newspapers and magazines, which publish details about factory production that German publications would classify as military secrets. Technical analysis of captured equipment serial numbers, which allow estimates of production volumes. Reports from agents in neutral countries analyzing trade statistics and shipping patterns. Interrogations of American prisoners who casually mention supply abundance that seems like fantasy to supply-starved Germans. The compiled data forms a picture of overwhelming American industrial advantage. In 1943, the United States produced 37,098 tanks. Germany produced 12,000. America built 85,998 aircraft. Germany built 25,000. American shipyards launched merchant vessels averaging 42 days from keel laying to completion. German shipyards required 6 months. These gaps are not marginal. They are existential. But production statistics alone do not capture the full disparity. Von Roen's intelligence staff has analyzed American logistics philosophy through captured planning documents. The Americans approach war as an industrial problem requiring industrial solutions. They stockpile supplies in quantities that German planners would consider criminally wasteful. They build redundant systems assuming that primary systems will fail. They allocate resources with safety margins that double or triple minimum requirements. This approach only works when production exceeds consumption by orders of magnitude. Germany's approach is opposite. German military planning emphasizes efficiency, conserving limited resources through precise calculation. This works well in short campaigns where existing stockpiles suffice. It fails catastrophically in prolonged conflicts where continuous production determines outcomes. By 1944, Germany is running on economic fumes. Oil production, even from synthetic plants, is insufficient for operational needs. Allied bombing has disrupted coal supplies essential for synthetic fuel production. The Ploiești oil fields in Romania are under Soviet threat. Germany's fuel allocation for September 1944 is 40% of June levels. The American armies advancing across France do not have fuel constraints. They have fuel abundance. The Red Ball Express alone transports more petroleum daily than the entire Wehrmacht consumes in the West. But the Express is merely one supply system among several. American forces also receive supplies through repaired rail lines delivering thousands of tons daily. Captured ports including Cherbourg and soon Antwerp. Aerial delivery via C-47 transport aircraft, capable of dropping 3 tons per plane. Pipelines being constructed to pump fuel directly from ports to forward areas. Operation Pluto, pipeline under the ocean, is being constructed to pump fuel from England directly to France, eventually capable of delivering 1 million gallons daily. The Americans are building petroleum infrastructure across the English Channel, while actively fighting. This represents logistics thinking at strategic scale. Germany is rationing fuel to existing forces. America is constructing fuel distribution networks for forces not yet deployed. Von Roen documents all this intelligence in reports forwarded to OKW. He knows the reports are read. He knows they are filed. He knows strategy does not change. This is not unusual. Military organizations are structurally resistant to intelligence that contradicts existing plans. Accepting that American logistics are unstoppable requires accepting that Germany has already lost. Acceptance means admitting years of sacrifice, millions of deaths have been for nothing. Denial is psychologically easier. November 16, 1944. The Red Ball Express officially ends operations. Not because it failed, it succeeded beyond expectations, but because it is no longer needed. The port of Antwerp has been cleared and opened, capable of handling tens of thousands of tons daily. Railway lines have been repaired eastward from Normandy, through Paris toward the German border. Pipelines are operational, delivering fuel directly to forward supply dumps. The emergency logistics system can be retired because permanent logistics systems are now functional. In 82 days of operation, the Red Ball Express delivered 412,193 tons of supplies to advancing American forces. It operated 5,958 vehicles at peak capacity, employed 23,000 drivers and support personnel, and ran continuously for nearly 3 months with breaks only for maintenance. It established logistics precedents that would influence American military doctrine for decades. For German intelligence officers tracking these operations, the Express's ending is more ominous than its operation. The Americans discontinued a logistics system that exceeded Germany's total capacity, not because it was inadequate, but because better systems became available. This progression, temporary expedient to permanent solution, demonstrated systematic logistics thinking at civilizational scale. Oberst Schäfer writes his final Red Ball Express report. He notes its success, documents its scale, analyzes its implications. He concludes, American logistics advantage is not technological but philosophical. They conceptualize war as an industrial problem requiring industrial solutions. They apply mass production principles to military supply, with the same efficiency they apply to automotive manufacturing. This approach is only possible for an economy with American production capacity. Germany fought this war believing superior soldiers could overcome material disadvantage. We were wrong. In industrial warfare, material advantage is decisive. The report is filed. The war continues. Schäfer survives until March 1945, when his reconnaissance aircraft is shot down by American fighters. He dies knowing Germany will lose, understanding why Germany is losing, unable to change the trajectory of events set in motion years earlier, when industrial democracies entered war against industrial autocracies. But the Red Ball expresses, legacy extends beyond its immediate military impact. In post-war analysis, German officers would identify American logistics as the decisive factor in Allied victory. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, captured and interrogated, stated, "The American logistics system was the most powerful weapon they deployed against us. Not their tanks, aircraft, or artillery, though these were formidable, but their ability to keep those weapons supplied and operational regardless of distance or obstacles." General Heinz Guderian, the Panzer theorist, wrote in his memoirs, "We underestimated American industrial capacity and overestimated our own efficiency. We believed our well-trained soldiers using limited resources effectively would prevail over American mass production and abundant supply. This was strategic delusion. In modern warfare, logistics capacity determines outcomes. The Americans understood this. We did not. These admissions came after defeat, when acknowledging American superiority no longer threatened German morale, but intelligence officers like Schäfer and von Roena understood years earlier. They documented the evidence, compiled the statistics, and wrote reports that went unheeded because accepting their conclusions required accepting the war's inevitable outcome. The Red Ball Express became symbol and reality simultaneously. As symbol, it represented American industrial supremacy, the capacity to mobilize continental resources for continental operations. As reality, it was simply trucks and drivers, mechanics and fuel, organization and execution. The symbol attracted myth-making. The reality was more prosing and more impressive. A logistics operation that worked not through elegance but through scale, not through innovation but through industrial capacity, applied with systematic thoroughness. American soldiers who drove the Red Ball routes would remember it differently than intelligence officers who analyzed it. For them, it was exhaustion and danger. 20-hour driving shifts and German artillery, mechanical breakdowns and accidents that killed drivers as surely as combat. It was also pride, knowing their labor kept armies supplied, that victory depended on their endurance, that segregation could not erase their essential contribution. The Red Ball Express was approximately 75% African American. History would take decades to fully acknowledge this fact. For German commanders observing from the other side, the Express represented unwelcome education in industrial warfare. They had entered the war believing military excellence could overcome material disadvantage. They learned slowly and painfully that modern warfare rewards production capacity above tactical brilliance. They discovered that logistics is not supporting arms but decisive arms, that supply chains do not enable combat but constitute combat's foundation. The contrast between American and German logistics philosophy reflected deeper differences in how each nation approached warfare. Germany optimized for efficiency, calculating minimum requirements and executing with Prussian precision. This worked brilliantly in short campaigns. Poland, France, the early Soviet offensive. It failed catastrophically in prolonged conflicts where continuous production mattered more than initial stockpiles. America approached war with capitalist logic: overproduce, accept waste, build redundancy, solve problems by throwing resources at them. This seemed inefficient to German planners accustomed to scarcity. But American abundance made efficiency irrelevant. When production exceeds consumption by orders of magnitude, waste becomes acceptable collateral of overwhelming success. The philosophical difference was not merely economic, but epistemological. Germans viewed war as art requiring mastery. Americans viewed war as process requiring scale. Germans celebrated individual excellence. Americans celebrated systematic production. German military culture valued the brilliant general who achieved victory against odds. American military culture valued the logistics officer who ensured generals never faced bad odds. Neither approach was inherently superior in abstract sense. But in the context of industrial total war between continental powers, the American approach proved decisively more effective. Brilliance without resources is impotent. Resources without brilliance are merely slower. The Americans had both sufficient brilliance and overwhelming resources. Germany had brilliance without resources. The outcome was mathematically determined. December 1944. The war enters its final phase. The Wehrmacht launches the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, one last desperate attempt to split Allied armies and force negotiated peace. The offensive's logistics planning is fantastical. German forces are allocated fuel sufficient to advance 60 kilometers. They are expected to capture American fuel dumps to continue operations. The entire strategic concept depends on seizing enemy supplies, because Germany cannot provide adequate supplies to its own forces. The offensive initially succeeds tactically. German forces break through American lines, advance westward, inflict significant casualties. Then American logistics respond. Within 72 hours, the 101st Airborne Division is transported by truck convoy to Bastogne and surrounded there. American supply aircraft begin dropping supplies to the encircled troops. Food, ammunition, medical supplies, even Christmas packages. German forces surrounding Bastogne are slowly starving. American forces inside Bastogne receive aerial resupply sufficient to maintain defense. This contrast encapsulates the war's logistics reality. Germany can advance but not sustain advances. America can supply forces faster than Germany can attack them. The Ardennes offensive collapses not primarily through tactical defeat, but through logistical exhaustion. German forces literally run out of fuel within sight of American supply dumps. Their tanks abandoned for lack of gasoline while American tanks continue operating with fuel, delivered by the thousands of gallons. Oberst Fischer, the logistics officer, writes his own final report in January 1945. The American Red Ball Express and subsequent logistics operations demonstrated that modern warfare is decided by industrial production translated into supply capacity. Germany cannot win this war because we lack industrial resources to maintain continuous operations. The Americans will continue advancing not because they fight better but because they supply better. This is not military defeat. This is economic defeat manifested through military means. His report concludes, future military planning must recognize that logistics capacity is primary military capability. Tactical excellence cannot overcome logistics insufficiency. Germany learned this lesson at catastrophic cost. The lesson's value depends on whether future German military planning incorporates this understanding. The report is filed. Germany surrenders 4 months later. The Red Ball Express, long since discontinued, becomes historical reference. But its legacy persists in military doctrine, in logistics planning, in understanding that modern warfare is fundamentally industrial warfare, that armies move on supply columns more surely than on courage or skill. Post-war analysis by both American and German military historians would identify logistics as the decisive factor in Allied victory. Not superior tactics. German tactical doctrine remained excellent through war's end. Not superior soldiers. German forces fought with skill and determination even in defeat. But superior logistics, the capacity to deliver overwhelming supplies continuously, to operate at continental distances without supply constraints, to waste resources with impunity because production capacity rendered waste irrelevant. The Red Ball Express became case study in military logistics courses at West Point, at the Army War College and staff colleges worldwide. Its lessons were studied not for operational details but for philosophical implications. The Express demonstrated that logistics is not subordinate to strategy, but determinative of strategy. Operational plans must conform to logistics realities. Attempts to exceed logistics capacity through tactical brilliance or operational art are delusional. German military writers, analyzing their defeat with characteristic thoroughness, identified logistics failure as fundamental cause of strategic failure. General Franz Halder wrote, "We planned operations based on what we wished to accomplish rather than what our logistics could support." The Americans planned operations based on what their logistics could sustain, then scaled logistics until they could support any operation. This difference in planning philosophy was decisive. The assessment was accurate. Germany fought a 20th century war with 19th century logistics philosophy. America brought 21st century logistics philosophy to 20th century war. The gap was unbridgeable through tactical excellence or operational brilliance. Logistics determined victory. Everything else was implementation detail. In the end, German commanders who initially scoffed at American logistics complexity, the vast supply trains, the enormous transportation infrastructure, the apparent inefficiency of moving so much material so far, came to understand that complexity itself was weapon. The Americans did not merely supply their armies adequately, they supplied them excessively, wastefully, with redundant systems ensuring no tactical setback could create strategic supply crisis. This approach frustrated German attempts to disrupt American operations. Cut one supply line, another compensates. Destroy supply dumps, more supplies arrive within days. Force American retreat. They retreat with their logistics intact and ready to advance again. The Wehrmacht could win tactical battles but not logistics wars. And modern industrial warfare is fundamentally logistics war, with tactical battles as subsidiary elements. So the Red Ball Express rumbled through history, its trucks driven mostly by African American soldiers whose contribution was essential, but marginally acknowledged, delivering supplies that kept Allied armies mobile and aggressive, demonstrating that logistics at scale becomes strategy itself. German intelligence officers watched this operation with professional appreciation and strategic despair, recognizing they were witnessing not merely superior organization but superior civilization, an industrial democracy that could mobilize resources at scales totalitarian efficiency could not match. The lesson was simple and devastating. In wars between industrial nations, production determines outcomes. Everything else, tactics, strategy, leadership, courage, matters only within constraints set by industrial capacity. Germany could not overcome American production. No amount of tactical brilliance or strategic genius could substitute for material superiority, measured in millions of trucks, billions of gallons of fuel, trillions of dollars of industrial output. The Red Ball Express was not America's greatest weapon. It was merely the most visible manifestation of America's greatest weapon. Industrial capitalism applied to total war with systematic ruthlessness. The Germans recognized this too late to matter. The recognition cost them everything. The lesson endures. In modern warfare, logistics is destiny. The rest is commentary.